The late afternoon sun hung low in the sky, painting the Ontario horizon in fiery shades of orange and red. Monica Trenton's fingers drummed lightly against the steering wheel of her black Dodge Charger, her eyes shifting between the empty highway ahead and the rearview mirror. The road stretched endlessly through the rural landscape, a picture of serenity, but something wasn't right. A black and white patrol car had been trailing her for the past 8 kilometers. No sirens, no flashing lights, just sitting in her blind spot, watching. Monica wasn't just another driver. She was a federal agent, a seasoned DEA officer who had spent years taking down high-profile traffickers. She knew exactly how this worked, small-town cops with unchecked power, playing their games on unsuspecting travelers, the kind who thrived on intimidation, who counted on people panicking under the weight of a flashing badge. But Monica Trenton wasn't like most people. She exhaled slowly, keeping her speed at 90 km/h, the posted limit. She had done nothing wrong. But that didn't matter. She had been in this line of work long enough to recognize the signs. And then, there it was. Red and blue lights flicked on behind her, illuminating the darkening sky. Here we go. Keeping her movements controlled, Monica signaled and eased onto the gravel shoulder. She turned off the engine and placed both hands on the steering wheel. Years of training dictated her every move. Stay calm, stay in control, give them nothing. 2 officers approached, one on each side of her car. The first, tall and lean, walked up to the driver's side window, sunglasses perched low on his nose. His movements were relaxed, almost lazy, like he had already decided how this was going to play out. Officer Ryan Whitmore, the second officer, stocky and in his mid-40s, flanked the passenger side, his thick hands resting on his duty belt. Cole Barrett. Their badges gleamed in the fading sunlight. Whitmore tapped the driver's side window. Monica rolled it down slowly. "Evening, officer." Her voice was neutral, controlled. "Listen and registration," Whitmore said, his tone clipped. Monica complied without hesitation, pulling the documents from her center console. He barely glanced at them. "You in a hurry, ma'am?" "No, officer." "You didn't see that stop sign a few kilometers back?" Monica's expression didn't change. There was no stop sign. A flicker of amusement crossed Whitmore's face, like a man playing a game he had already won. "Step out of the vehicle." There it was, the escalation. She kept her breathing steady. "On what grounds?" "We'll discuss that outside the vehicle." Monica knew better than to argue. This was the game. If she refused, it would be non-compliance. If she objected, it would be resisting arrest. She had trained agents for situations just like this. Slowly, deliberately, she unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out onto the gravel. The evening air was thick and still, the quiet humming with an underlying tension. Barrett moved behind her. "Turn around." Monica tilted her head slightly. "Excuse me?" "Turn around. Hands behind your back." And then Whitmore took a step closer. "You've got drugs in that car, don't you?" Monica almost laughed, the absurdity of it. She held his gaze, her voice steady. "I'm a federal agent. My badge is in my—" Before she could finish, Barrett grabbed her wrist. Instinct took over. Her body tensed, muscle memory kicking in from years of training. She snapped her arm away before stopping herself just in time. This wasn't a fight she needed to win with force. Not yet. "That's assault on a federal officer," she said coldly. Whitmore's smirk faltered for a split second before he recovered. "Lady, I don't care who you say you are, we got probable cause. You fit a description." A description. Monica had heard that phrase too many times before. It always meant the same thing, an excuse to justify a bad stop. Whitmore turned toward her car, speaking into his radio. "Dispatch, we got a suspicious vehicle, possible drug transport, requesting canine." Monica's jaw clenched. This wasn't just harassment, this was a setup. Barrett's hand hovered near his taser. "We're not going to ask again." Monica could take them down right now. She had years of combat training, knew exactly how to disable both men before they even realized what had happened. But she had to be smart. She had to let them think they were winning. Slowly, she turned around and placed her hands behind her back. The cold steel of the cuffs snapped tight around her wrists. They shoved her toward the patrol car, her own badge still in Whitmore's hands, and he hadn't even looked at it. Then Whitmore leaned in close, his voice smug. "Welcome to Wilkins County, sweetheart." But he had no idea who he was dealing with. The back seat of a patrol car wasn't unfamiliar to Monica Trenton. She had sat in plenty over the years. Just never like this. Hands cuffed, legs cramped, watching two corrupt officers pat each other on the back like they'd just won the lottery. Outside, Ryan Whitmore and Cole Barrett stood by her black Dodge Charger, their laughter carrying through the warm evening air. Whitmore popped the trunk with a theatrical flourish, whistling low as if he had just made the biggest bust of his career. Monica didn't have to see it to know what was happening. Drugs. Planted. The game was so predictable it almost bored her. A vacuum-sealed brick of meth or fentanyl, something easy to explain away in court, a charge so damning that even the most skeptical judge wouldn't question it. And they thought she was just another victim. Whitmore turned to Barrett, holding up the brick with a smirk. Well, look at what we got here." Barrett strutted over, already grinning like he knew the outcome. "That's a damn shame," he drawled. Monica breathed evenly through her nose, keeping her face blank. This wasn't sloppiness, this was routine. They had done this before. Pick a target. Plant the evidence. Let the system swallow them whole. Whitmore swaggered toward the patrol car, arms resting lazily on the window frame as he peered inside at her. "Now you had a badge, sure," he said, mocking her, "but I ain't ever heard of a DEA agent running kilos through my county. Ain't that right, Cole?" Barrett chuckled. She thought flashing a fake badge was going to save her. Monica's lips barely moved. "Read the damn badge, genius." Whitmore's smirk widened. "Oh, I read it." He leaned in. "Real or not, don't matter. 'Cause guess what? In about 24 hours, that fancy DEA title ain't gonna mean a damn thing." Monica tilted her head, watching him. "That right?" "Oh, yeah," Whitmore said, voice smug. "Once we get this booked, once your face is plastered all over the news, no one's gonna give a damn who you say you are. You're just another criminal." His grin sharpened. "And in this town, sweetheart, you don't get to win." They really thought they could bury her, that no one would come looking, that she was just another face, another statistic. Monica smiled, just a little. It was enough to make Whitmore pause. "You think this is funny?" he snapped. Her voice was calm. "I think you're an idiot." A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "Fine." Barrett yanked open the patrol car door, yanking her out. "That's enough." The cuffs dug into her wrists as they shoved her forward, leading her into the Wilkins County Sheriff's Office, a small, outdated station where things had a habit of disappearing. People, paperwork, entire cases. The grizzled desk sergeant barely looked up as they dragged her inside. "What's this?" he muttered. "Trafficker," Barrett said, sliding Monica's badge across the counter. "Fake DEA credentials," Whitmore added. The sergeant squinted at it, but didn't question anything. "Just another day, just another easy arrest." "Put her in holding," he muttered. Whitmore grabbed Monica's elbow, guiding her toward a hallway lined with holding cells. He leaned in close. "This is where you start thinking about how bad you just messed up." Monica didn't blink. "I'm not the one who messed up." Whitmore grinned. "We'll see about that." The cell door clanged shut, the cold metal bench pressing against her spine. She rolled her shoulders. She wasn't worried about getting out. That was inevitable. What she was thinking about was how to make them pay. But first she had to let them dig their own graves a little deeper. The cold metal bench pressed against Monica Trenton's spine as she sat with her back straight, her hands resting on her lap. The air inside the Wilkins County holding cell was thick, a mix of sweat, bad decisions, and the faint staleness of burnt coffee from the front desk. She had been in places like this before, but never on this side of the bars. Across the cell, a young black man, barely in his 20s, sat slumped against the wall, his knees drawn up. He had a bruise on his cheek, fading but still visible. He glanced at her. His dark eyes were cautious. "You new here?" he asked. Monica smirked. "Something like that." He nodded, rubbing at his cheek absently. "Let me guess, Whitmore and Barrett?" Monica didn't answer. She didn't need to. The young man chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Yeah, they got me too." Monica tilted her head, studying him. "For what?" He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "You name it." Said my taillight was out, pulled me over. Next thing I know, I got a suspicious amount of cash on me. His voice was laced with bitterness. "I work at a damn warehouse, been saving up for months." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Funny thing is, by the time we got here, that cash was gone." Monica's jaw clenched. So this was routine. Whitmore and Barrett weren't just dirty, they were predators. They hunted people they knew couldn't fight back. People without connections, without power. She leaned forward slightly. "How long have you been in here?" The young man swallowed hard. 3 days. Monica's pulse ticked up. "No call?" "No lawyer." His hands curled into tight fists. "My mom don't even know where I'm at." 3 days. Long enough for things to disappear. Long enough for names to get lost in paperwork or be buried completely. Monica took a slow breath. She was done waiting. Standing up, she rolled out the tension in her shoulders, stretching. The cuffs were gone now. Small victory. But she was still locked in a cell, and that wouldn't do. She stepped toward the thick iron bars, glancing toward the front desk. A single deputy sat there, flipping through paperwork, not even looking at them. Then she heard it. Heavy footsteps. Whitmore and Barrett. The young man tensed beside her. "Here we go." Whitmore stopped in front of the bars, grinning like a man who thought he had already won. He tapped the metal with his knuckle, slow and deliberate. "How's it feel, sweetheart?" Monica met his gaze. "Cone." "Like a joke." Barrett chuckled, shaking his head. "Oh, it's real. Real enough that you ain't leaving any time soon." Monica tilted her head slightly. "You sure about that?" Whitmore crossed his arms, smirking. "Listen, I get it. You thought flashing that badge was gonna mean something. But this ain't the big city. Around here we run things. No feds, no fancy lawyers, no backup, just us." Monica took a slow step forward, her voice even. "That's so?" Whitmore grinned. "That's so." She exhaled, shaking her head slightly. "Amateurs." She let the word sit there, hanging in the air. Then, outside the station, tires screeched. Whitmore's radio crackled. "Sheriff, we got federal agents at the front entrance. They're asking for a Monica Trenton." Whitmore's grin vanished. Monica stepped closer to the bars, tilting her head. "You were saying?" Barrett grabbed his radio, panic creeping into his voice. "Who the hell called the feds?" Monica gave them both a knowing smile. "I didn't have to." "Yeah." The front door of the station slammed open. Boots on tile. Loud, purposeful. And then, a voice. "Where the hell is my agent?" Whitmore and Barrett froze. Monica. She just smiled. And just like that, the game was over. The wood-paneled courtroom smelled of old paper and stale coffee. It was the kind of place where men like Whitmore and Barrett had always felt untouchable. Not today. Monica Trenton sat at the defendant's table, her posture calm, her expression unreadable. She had been waiting for this moment. Across the room, Whitmore and Barrett sat with their lawyer, a frazzled local defense attorney who looked like he already knew he had lost. The judge, an older man with silver hair and a no-nonsense gaze, cleared his throat. "Let's begin." The prosecutor stood, adjusting his tie. "Your Honor, the state has charged Ms. Trenton with drug trafficking, possession with intent to distribute, and resisting arrest." A murmur rippled through the room. Monica barely reacted. She wanted them to feel comfortable, to believe for just a second longer that they were still in control. The judge turned to her. "Miss Trenton, do you have legal representation?" She leaned forward, her voice even. "That won't be necessary, Your Honor." Gasps, confused whispers. The prosecutor frowned. The judge nodded, his curiosity piqued. "Very well. How do you plead?" Monica smiled. "Before I answer that, Your Honor, I'd like to present something to the court." She reached into a file folder and pulled out a laminated ID. Stepping forward, she handed it to the bailiff, who walked it up to the judge. The room was silent. The judge studied it, his eyebrows lifting. The prosecutor leaned in, his confusion deepening. "What is that?" The judge set the ID down with a sigh. Then he turned to the officers. His expression shifted. "This is a federal badge." The courtroom fell into dead silence. The judge's gaze hardened as he turned back to Whitmore and Barrett. "Miss Trenton is a special agent with the DEA." Whitmore and Barrett's faces drained of color. Monica's voice was smooth, sharp as a blade. "That's correct, Your Honor, and if the prosecution wants to continue pressing charges against a federal agent who is framed by two corrupt officers, I'd be happy to proceed." The prosecutor's face twisted in shock. "Your Honor, The judge cut him off with a raised hand. Then he looked at the officers. "Would you two like to explain yourselves?" Whitmore shifted in his seat, his confidence crumbling. "Your Honor, we were acting on probable cause." Monica laughed. A sharp, biting sound. "Probable cause?" She leaned forward. "You had nothing. You pulled me over because you thought you could get away with it." The judge's expression darkened. He turned to the prosecutor. "I assume you will be dropping all charges?" The prosecutor, looking sick, nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." "Good." The judge turned to Monica. "Agent Trenton, you're free to go." She didn't move. Instead, she turned toward Whitmore and Barrett, arms crossed. "Now," she said, voice calm, controlled, "let's talk about what happens to dirty cops who frame innocent people. This time, they wouldn't be the ones walking away." The courtroom emptied quickly, the weight of what had just unfolded still hanging in the air. Whitmore and Barrett were gone, led away in handcuffs, their arrogance shattered. Justice was a long game, but today Monica Trenton had won. She stood near the defense table, exhaling slowly. The prosecutor sat at his desk, rubbing his temples, looking as if the ground had just collapsed beneath him. He had walked into the courtroom thinking he was prosecuting a criminal, only to find out he had been playing into the hands of corruption. The judge had already left, leaving only Monica, Deputy Director Holt, and a few federal agents lingering in the near-silent room. Holt turned to her, arms crossed, his face unreadable. "You good?" he asked. She nodded. "Yeah." He exhaled, shaking his head. "I figured something was off when you didn't check in after court yesterday. When the station refused to confirm your arrest, I knew we had a problem." Monica smirked. "Appreciate the cavalry." Holt gave her a long look. "You're lucky you're not in deeper trouble. You should have identified yourself the second they put cuffs on you." Monica shrugged. "Wouldn't have mattered. They were never going to check." Holt ran a hand down his face, muttering under his breath. "You always do things the hard way." She smirked. "Hard way gets results." He let out a dry chuckle. "Can't argue with that." Just then the doors swung open again. The young man from Monica's holding cell, the warehouse worker who had spent 3 days locked up without a lawyer, stepped inside. A federal agent escorted him, but this time he wasn't in cuffs. His eyes darted between Monica and Holt. They said I'm free to go, he said cautiously. Holt nodded. All charges dropped. Your record will be cleared. The young man let out a breath, relief visible on his face. But then, his expression shifted. Something harder, wary. What about them? Monica understood the question. Whitmore and Barrett? He nodded. She met his gaze, steady. He swallowed, nodding slowly. Good. A pause. Then, quieter. This happens a lot, doesn't it? Monica didn't lie to him. Yeah, it does. His shoulders tensed, his hands curling into fists at his sides. But before anger could take hold, she added, Not today. He studied her for a moment, then gave a small nod. A nod of respect, gratitude, maybe even hope. That was enough. He turned to leave, but before stepping out he paused. Thanks, he muttered. Monica watched as he disappeared down the hall. He shouldn't have had to thank her. He should have never been in that position in the first place. Holt clapped a hand on her shoulder. Come on, let's get you out of here. But before she could move, the prosecutor's voice cut through the room. Agent Trenton? She turned. He stood there, his face still pale, his confidence shaken. He hesitated, then exhaled. You're lucky we found out who you were before trial, he admitted. If this had gone any further. Monica raised an eyebrow. I'm not the one who got lucky today. He blinked. She stepped closer, her voice low and sharp. You didn't ask questions when they brought me in. You took their word, filed the charges, and let me rot in a cell. Her eyes bored into him. How many others have you done that to? The prosecutor stiffened, looking away. I'm not looking for an answer, she said. But you should be. His gaze dropped, shame flickering in his expression. He had nothing to say. Monica didn't wait for a response. She turned, walking toward the doors, Holt following beside her. Outside, the Ontario sky was fading into deep oranges and purples, the last traces of daylight disappearing behind the trees. A warm breeze carried the scent of pine through the air. Monica breathed it in. Holt nudged her. You ready to go? She gave a small smile. Yeah, because this wasn't just a win. It was a warning. And people like Whitmore and Barrett? They weren't the only ones who needed to hear it. Monica Trenton stepped out of the courthouse, the last traces of daylight fading behind the trees. The air smelled cleaner out here, like freedom had a scent. And she wasn't about to take it for granted. Deputy Director Holt walked beside her, hands shoved in his pockets, his usual no-nonsense expression softening just a bit. They'll be in federal custody by morning, he said. Monica nodded, stretching her sore wrists. The prosecutor's office is scrambling, Holt continued, trying to distance themselves from the mess. Monica smirked. They should be. This isn't just about two dirty cops. It's about an entire system that let them get away with it. Holt sighed, shaking his head. You know, this won't be the last time we see this. Monica exhaled slowly. Yeah, she admitted. But today? Today, they put two away. A few feet ahead, a small group of people had gathered near the courthouse steps. Locals. People who had likely dealt with Whitmore and Barrett before. People who never thought they'd see them taken down. Among them, Monica spotted the young warehouse worker from the holding cell. He stood off to the side, hands shoved in his pockets, watching her. When their eyes met, he gave her a short nod. Respect, gratitude, maybe even hope. That was enough. She returned the nod, then turned toward Holt's black SUV. As he unlocked the doors, he shot her a knowing glance. So, he said, what's next for you? Monica slid into the passenger seat, rolling out the stiffness in her shoulders. She leaned back, watching as the courthouse grew smaller in the rearview mirror. Then, with a small smirk, she answered, the usual. Holt chuckled as he started the engine. Which is? Monica's gaze darkened, her voice quiet but certain. making sure the next Whitmore and Barrett think twice before trying this again. Because some people think power protects them, that the right badge, the right connections, the right system will shield them from consequences. But justice has a way of catching up. Whitmore and Barrett? They weren't special. They were just two more names added to a long list of people who thought they could get away with it. Until they didn't. And for those who still believed they were untouchable, they'd find out soon enough. Powerful men often believe they are untouchable, that the system will always shield them, that their badges, ranks, and connections will keep them safe. But today, that illusion shattered. Monica Trenton leaned back in the passenger seat of the black SUV, the rhythmic hum of the road beneath them a welcome sound. For the first time in hours, she was free. Across from her, Deputy Director Holt drove in silence, his gaze fixed on the highway ahead. The weight of everything that had happened still hung heavy between them. "You did good today," Holt finally said. Monica let out a breath, staring out the window. "Did I?" Holt glanced at her. "You brought down 2 corrupt officers. You exposed their entire operation. You saved more people than you realize." Monica let those words settle, but something still nagged at her. "They were just 2 men," she said. "But how many more are out there?" The SUV rolled to a stop at a red light, the glow reflecting in Holt's tired eyes. "More than we can count," he admitted. "But one at a time, Trenton. That's how we win." She nodded slowly. Outside, the night air was cool, the scent of pine and damp pavement drifting through the cracked window. The courthouse was behind them, but the fight wasn't over. It never was. Because Whitmore and Barrett weren't unique. They were part of a machine, one that preyed on the vulnerable, that operated in shadows, that depended on people being too afraid to fight back. Today, that machine took a hit. And tomorrow, it would take another. As they pulled onto the freeway, Monica's thoughts drifted back to the young man from the holding cell. His bruised face, his stolen money, his 3 days of silence, lost in the system. That could have been anyone. It had been too many. And it would happen again. Unless someone stopped it. Monica turned to Holt, her voice steady. "Drop me at the field office. I'm not done yet." Holt shook his head, a small chuckle escaping. "Didn't think you were. Because some fights don't end." And Monica Trenton? She wasn't walking away. In life, there will always be those who believe power makes them untouchable. They manipulate systems, exploit the vulnerable, and assume no one will stand against them. But the truth is, justice prevails when people refuse to be silent. Monica Trenton's story is more than just one of personal victory. It is a reminder that corruption thrives in the absence of accountability. It teaches us that even when the odds seem insurmountable, the courage to speak up, to demand truth, and to fight for fairness can bring real change. For seniors, this message is especially powerful. With a lifetime of experience, we have witnessed injustices, seen systems fail, and watched as some abuse their power. But our voices still matter. Standing for what is right, whether for ourselves, our families, or future generations, is a responsibility that never fades. The lesson is simple. Never assume wrongdoing will fix itself. Change happens when good people act, when truth is pursued, and when we refuse to let power replace principle. Justice should never be optional, and it is up to each of us to ensure it remains a right, not a privilege.